welcome to the inaugural episode of the Phantom Punch podcast. So this will be a podcast that's different from Fight Mind, and if you guys don't know, Fight Mind is where JDK and I discuss misrepresented and under-discussed topics in MMA. So Phantom Punch podcast, I'll have a guest on, and we'll talk about a couple of interesting fights that we saw during the weekend. This won't be a regular podcast, but I will make an announcement on my YouTube post when these will drop. So make sure you guys turn on notifications. So for this week, my guest host is Kick from Movement Martials. And we're going to discuss why Valentina is the GOAT and why she's the most exciting fighter in the world. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to go over UFC 315, Jack Della Maddalena's performance. And without further ado, here's Kick from Movement Martials. How we doing, my man?
Yo, what's up, dude? Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Get into it. JDM versus Belal. Like, what did you think of JDM's performance?
I mean, it was incredibly impressive. Really, he basically implemented everything that I said he should do in my article, which made me feel pretty good. All my preview articles have had that effect, except for like one. So that makes me feel good. And it was a really considered performance where he was able to shore up a lot of the more worrying habits that he's kind of exhibited throughout his career. And we can, of course, get into those, while really tailoring his game around beating not just Belal, but just beating a guy who likes to wrestle and likes to stay on top.
Yeah, and I think we need to get this out of the way first. There's a bunch of engagement baiters out there trying to say Belal had one of the worst game plans ever, or Belal was trying to be exciting, that's why he didn't shoot for takedowns. So if you're one of those guys, you're just wrong. So, like, first off, for Belal to get his takedowns, like, he needs to be the one pushing forward towards the fence. And when he's able to do that, he's able to get his locked hands double. He's able to force the clinch, recycle positions from there. And I guess that's kind of what makes it boring. And if he can't do that, he's the one being pushed back. Look at Movement Martials' article. He references that a lot. Like, Belal will skirt around the cage. And when he does do that, like, he's getting picked apart. And then the second part is it's actually harder for Belal to shoot when his back is near the fence and in open space. Like, you saw this in the Leon fight. Whenever he shoot in open space, he would not get the takedown. And if you look at the majority of where the fight played out, it was mainly Belal behind the interior black line of the octagon. So do you have anything to add to that?
No, you're exactly right. And if you, well, on the first thing, you can't, actually, first thing, all those people saying that, yeah, they just don't get it. And it's really easy if you're not a super educated MMA fan, and not everybody is, and that's fine, but it's really easy to just fall into these weird tropes like, oh, he was doing it for the fans, he was doing it for this. And you and I even had like a conversation in DMs about how complicated of a sport mixed martial arts and all combat sports are, and how there's so many mental things that go on with a fighter. But one of the things that I don't really think most fighters are ever thinking about, unless you're like Michael Chandler, is entertaining the fans. Like, that's, if you have an entertaining style, great, and the people that do are generally proud of it, but their job is to win fights. Half their paycheck is to win the fight. So I really don't think it's ever about trying to prove anybody wrong and do X, Y, Z, unless, like I said, you're Michael Chandler, or you like to do like that mind game thing, like John Jones, they said, used to do, you know, where he would like try and beat them in the area they're good in or whatever. But that was like in his later career, and even then that wasn't exactly right. So on that note, yeah, just fighting's really complicated. Fighters generally aren't doing things for that reason. And if you've ever been a competitor of anything yourself, you probably aren't doing things for that reason either. And in regards to actually Belal's performance, yeah, he does tend to skirt around the cage. They kept talking about him being a pressure fighter, and when he's working and his game plan's working well, he is a pressure fighter because he does just get his little jabs in, he gets his little 1-2s in, starts to push you towards the cage. The Leon performance, the rematch, was the best example of this. It wasn't even necessarily a technical thing, just that he was pushing forward the whole time, and he didn't mind if he had a couple shots. That's going to be different when you have a guy who's not as passive like JDM. And his default mode is really to skirt along the edge of the cage. And unless you're a super athletic guy, you're generally not going to be able to hit some reactive double with your back to the cage and or on the back foot. I think he hit one like once in this fight, and it was really nice. He just got right on the hips and took JDM down in like the 4th round. But that's tough. And Belal's athleticism is largely centered around him being, as we saw in this fight, just a tank for damage. He has a great chin and a big head to absorb all that damage. And also, he's got great cardio. And we can get into the cardio in this fight. But that's where his athleticism lies. And he's not generally going to be able to just blast someone into a great double or like a great, even just a great single leg. He relies on the cage a lot to get his wrestling offense going.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Leon performance with Belal. So, like, in that performance, like, he didn't necessarily even cut the cage. He just walked up to Leon, and Leon had to keep correcting the distance, backed up towards the cage. JDM really established the jab early, so I don't think Belal had the opportunity to just walk up to him. Because if he did walk up to him, whenever Belal walks up to anybody, he's square. He has his hands like not in the right position most of the time. Like he's not really controlling JDM's jab with his rear hand. So like whenever he does walk up to JDM, like it's giving him the jab. So that's why I think he was more pensive or more like this fight specifically.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. The thing that you saw JDM do like immediately within the first minutes of the fight was he got his jab going. He got his jab varied with the body into the head with the dipping jab. And he kept putting in like these level change feints and these step in feints. And he just kept moving. And this might not be the perfect example, but just the general way he was flowing in this fight with the jab and the both to the head and to the body, dipping with it, and then doing that with the straight to the body as well. In just the general flow that he was doing and occupying the dead spaces of the fight like that, it kind of reminded me of Ilya. And I'm not saying he's as good as Ilya. I'm not saying he's the exact same fighter, but it kind of reminded me of how Ilya approaches a fight with establishing his jab, with establishing the straight in those dead spaces before he kind of gets into that like active counter punching role that JDM did get to at points in this fight. All those things were established really early, so Belal couldn't just be countering one thing. He was aware of the jab, the feints, the jab to the body, the dipping with it, and even like the naked right, not naked right straights. He usually had like a split step or something with them in this fight. But he had all that going early, and it was just a couple weapons that he was both feinting and using that just got Belal to be thinking about a lot all at once.
I think that's a great point that you pointed out. The way he controlled the dead space with those feints and jabs, the difference between Ilya and JDM is Ilya will like fully commit to a weight transition and to a side.
Yes.
So sometimes he overextends a lot when he does commit to a punch. Whereas you saw in this fight, JDM's not really overcommitting at all. He's doing a really good job staying under his feet and like using just poking, prodding jabs and right hands.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that was actually probably one of the biggest things. I did mention this near the end of my article as like a general strategy, but that was one of the biggest things I think he kind of needed to improve on, especially against a wrestler, because when you overextend both in terms like mechanically, like you're overextending yourself over your hips, and overextend a combination like into the 4 or 5 punches, those are the times when a wrestler loves to hit that reactive double because your weight's really far forward, your lead leg's super heavy. You can just get them right there. And he was really prone to doing that throughout his whole career because he could just, bang people out because he's just got heavy ass hands. But the other side of that is when you have really heavy hands, you don't need to throw as hard to elicit a reaction. And what he did throughout this fight immediately, and which I loved, was and there's not a better word for it, but there was just a real sense of flow in all of his punches and that he wasn't really trying, like he wasn't overextending. He was just throwing it into the open space, and they still had enough power on them to get a reaction from Belal and to keep him on the back foot and slow him down. But he was never really overextending himself. It was a really considered performance from him, which strategically, I guess more tactically, was one of the main things he needed to improve coming into this fight.
Since he was throwing a lot of non-committals out there, especially the jab, like it would force Belal to reset. Because like you mentioned in the article, Belal doesn't have like a layered like defense in the pocket. Like
No.
he has 2 things that he wants to do whenever he gets into striking exchanges. He's either gonna back up and cross his feet, or he's gonna do that weird thing where he parries and dips to the rear side. Shout out Danton, by the way. So every time JDM would flick out like his jab, like it would actually force Belal to start to circle out. And again, like you mentioned in the article, his main when he's not pressing forward.
Exactly. And you even saw JDM start to take advantage of that is when he was circling. You'd see JDM in the early round, you'd see him do that lateral movement into a stance switch just to cut off that side and that exit, which is like considered stance switching, which you saw in this fight. And again, I don't want to keep referencing it, but it's kind of inevitable, which I talked about throughout the article. Belal is almost forced to switch stances out of necessity. He does actually overextend himself a lot when he's kind of throwing his right straight, and he needs to bring his rear foot forward to square his stance out of necessity so he doesn't fall over himself. JDM, on the other hand, while he has overextended himself in the past, his stance switches this fight were generally hidden between lateral movement, either to catch Belal unawares or cut him off. He started most rounds orthodox, I think, and then would switch to southpaw within like the first minute or two. Or right after he hit Belal with something big. I recall one time in like the second round, good combination against the cage, and then he switched stances as Belal was still recovering. And that's another perfect time to do it. JDM was switching stances in a really thoughtful, considered way, whereas Belal tends to do it just as a general mix-up, almost like Marab, where he just wants to throw things out there and just see how you react and keep you occupied. When you can't actually get your game going and you don't have everything happening at once, that just becomes a really obvious thing to take advantage of.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. The fact that whenever Belal would throw his right hand, his rear foot would come up to level, especially when he has to trade. It doesn't put him in great position to exit. Whenever he would throw his right straight and JDM would like jab again, he gave JDM a way out.
No, I saw the same exact thing. And JDM would either get that way out, or I believe in the fourth round, Belal hits him with like this right straight, and he's bringing his feet to level, and JDM just cracks it with his own rear hand. And you don't really notice it because JDM's kind of covered up along the cage, and Belal enters the clinch. But Belal like stumbles, and he does this thing always where his feet are square, he gets hit big, and he kind of stumbles like with a completely square stance. Whenever he gets hit, that's kind of his reaction because his feet are never in that position to take a good shot when he's entering that exchange. And when he's in that exchange, like you said, he's either exiting, crossing his feet, or he's just trying to make it kind of messy. And against Leon, that worked because Leon's really passive and he tends to look for these really nice, clean strikes. He likes to get his clinch and then work from there. Against JDM, JDM loves working in the pocket, and he loves countering as you're entering the pocket and then continuing his own exchange. And when you have as much power as JDM, you're naturally going to be the one who has an advantage in that position every time. It's really hard to overwhelm a guy who's a more powerful puncher than you when you have your own mechanical deficiencies in terms of striking and positioning when you enter the exchange.
And I think that's what really hurt Belal in this fight specifically because, well, like we said, he only has the two ideas mechanically pocket, right?
Mm-hmm.
The dip to the power side and back up. He didn't have like what JDM had, which was like after he'd throw a jab, he'd either roll, jab and dip, which Jack Slack talked about in his latest podcast.
Yeah, I purposely didn't listen to it yet because I didn't want to just repeat what he said.
Right. This is gonna trigger the Twitter weaves. He even had pivots in there.
Yes, he did. He pivoted out of exchanges really nicely. And this is actually where I do want to give Belal some credit because it's easy to shit on Belal. He is really boring. This fight was really only not boring because Belal was getting beat up. I see a lot of people talking about like, oh, Belal had this great fight. Yes, he did. And he really did show a lot of grit. He took a lot of damage. He was never not trying to win the fight. He's a real fighter, and I never like to shit on fighters because they're the ones in the arena doing it. Some people can shit on Belal way too much, but he is a more boring guy. This fight was largely exciting because JDM was the one pushing the action. As you see, he has these mechanical deficiencies, but he does come prepared, and he does have a really good tactical eye. The two things that I noticed that he kept going to were he would be able to catch JDM a couple times with a left hook as he pivoted out of an exchange to Belal's lead side. He caught him with a left hook a couple times, and he would get JDM's head moving a couple times. JDM had spectacular head movement this fight, and he did catch him a couple times with a good high kick. He has a good eye for these things, and he's a good tactical fighter. It's just his one lack of like explosive power, because again, we've talked about this too, like athleticism is a multifaceted thing. Belal is a strong guy. I'm pretty sure you can tell from he's just able to stay on top really well. He's got good wrestling mechanics to stay on top, and he's got really good cardio, but he's not that powerful or explosive. And he's also just doesn't have really good mechanics in terms of footwork. And so even though he had those good reads, he wasn't really able to capitalize off of them or build off of them because JDM just didn't really care anytime he was hit.
You mentioned Bilal's like adaptability in this fight, and that's something that I don't think he gets a lot of credit for. You knowing me, I don't say this lightly. Belal is probably one of the better game planners in MMA, like as a whole. He comes in prepared with specific plans. What really let him down were like the habits that he had in his striking. Again, we keep referencing the article, but like you said, like he's very strong. He's not very fast, but he does understand where the fight needs to be happening. Really letting down in this case was, I think, like we keep going back to it, was his.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that in MMA right now, there's almost like a renaissance of champions and really good fighters with not the best mechanics, but they have really well considered game plans. But the thing that separates a lot of those guys from Belal is they're so maxed out in at least like one other area of their athletic gifts that they are able to make up for it, and they can still make it work tactically. And like the examples generally are Drickus is the best one. He's my favorite one because he's funny and he gets like the least credit for being a really tactical fighter because he finds all these good openings and he has good strategic approaches and he has really bad striking mechanics, but he's a really crafty grappler and he's tank of a human being. You have Merab, who has the most insane cardio and can just keep throwing things out there. And both these guys have great chins, like Belal, almost like an nth degree, though. And Merab doesn't have the best striking mechanics. They're not horrible, not nearly as bad as DDP's, but he's just not like, he's not like Jose Aldo out there. Even some of his shots can be like a little messy, but generally he's just really good at getting people down. He doesn't care about staying on top, and he throws things out there. Kind of similar with Pantoja, another guy who doesn't have the best striking mechanics all the time, just a wizard on the ground. And then you have someone like Paddy Pimblett coming up, who, again, horrible punching mechanics, but he's got really good kicks, and he's pretty big for the division, and he's really tailored his approach to funnel him into his winning condition of being on the ground and either being able to have awesome ground and pound or get to a submission. Belal just doesn't really have like that one thing that he's really good at. He doesn't really have that one thing that separates him athletically in any way, besides just pretty good cardio that he was able to leverage with that tactical gift that he has.
That's what's important about, like, when we talk about Belal, he's really good at game planning. He has really good cardio, and he's really tough. People don't understand this, but like 10% of fighting is game planning. So it's not really the most important thing. It becomes really big when you're at the highest levels, which is what we're talking about right now. But like 90% of fighting is just about being tough, being strong, and having good cardio. I don't know if you agree with me there.
No, you're definitely right. I mean, it's easy in like people we follow, people we're friends with, and our followers to really spec into like the game planning techniques, tactics thing, because it's an interesting part of fighting that for so long you only really got through like little quips from coaches. It wasn't really talked about a whole lot. You know what I mean? Like it was only really in like these snippets of interviews. And it is kind of like that secret sauce at the highest level that it's harder for the layman to understand because, and I'm not using that disparagingly. Like I'm a layman myself. I only just started doing this. I only just started doing this as like a career, like 3 years ago. We've been the movement martials. Yeah, like 3 years ago. Listened to a lot of other analysts. I've watched a lot of fights and I've gotten to the point where I can do it pretty well. Like you said, like it's one part of the puzzle. And when you are at the elite level, that's where it becomes really important because everyone who's made it to that point is already so freaking tough. They've proved themselves over years of fighting. They have the savvy to kind of just know. There's like that veteran savvy stuff of kind of knowing how to win around, which can definitely come up. All these little things. But like you said, it's a physical sport at the end of the day. And one of the things that's really overlooked, which is part of what someone like Hybrid does, which you have an insight into, which a thick and I do is like that strength and conditioning aspect. And a lot of fighters don't have great strength and conditioning, but a lot of them programs, that is, or they're not maximizing their potential, but they tend to be really good athletes. And just by the nature of sparring, drilling, fighting, you're just going to become more athletic, even if you don't have the best, program in the world, which is why I like people to start doing combat sports in some fashion, because you will get more fit. It's really tiring. It's a full body workout. And if you are doing it professionally, you're going to be a good athlete in some respect.
Yeah, and bringing it back to Belal, like I wouldn't consider him like a great athlete, right?
No,
He's more of a guy that really gets by on his good game plans.
correct.
And even though like he is boring, like that should be something that like me, you, that is really something that we should like, but at the end of the day, we don't because of boring.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bilal's habit. One of the things I like what JDM did early on was whenever Belal would level his feet, JDM would throw the right straight. It wasn't a committed right straight. Ryan Wagner says it's a flicky right straight, right? You're just on top of the ball of your foot with your rear foot, and then you just like poke out your right straight there. And I thought that was the perfect lead for JDM just because Belal doesn't have a great reactive takedown to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And with his feet level, Belal doesn't usually expect much offense coming back at him.
Again, the right straight and the jab were both kind of accomplishing the same thing this fight, where he feinted with them. He used them with his kind of like level change fakes, did the right straight with the split stance, also that flicky one, like you said, and varied the targets to the head and body while doing that dip. He did the dipping right straight, he did the dipping jab. So his head was always a little off center. He made sure that Belal couldn't have any sort of return. Even though you're not worried necessarily about Belal cracking you, you can always get cracked with a counter shot. It's fighting. He always made sure that Belal couldn't get anything going on him while just keeping the dead spaces of the fight in his favor.
Even after he threw that right straight, that non-committal right straight, he would combine it with a defensive movement, whether it was like a level change, a weave out, or a really underrated defensive movement is just to double jab your way out. Like you don't even have to move your head there. Like after you throw your right straight, and then I think this was in the third round, like after he threw his like non-committed right straight, he'll just double jab out to his left.
You're exactly right. And he would double jab out to the left, and that's kind of where Belal maybe started to catch him. It's the integrated defense, not just like proper, quote unquote defense, having good high guard, which he did have this fight, was a really good high guard. It's having those integrated defensive movements where even if it's not solely defense, the nature of, let's say, double jabbing keeps the opponent on the back foot. So the offensive tactic becomes defensive in nature because you're preventing the opponent from doing anything.
The double jab was probably one of the thing that most people won't talk about like as an exit, because everybody's talking about like the weave, the high guard, but they're not going to talk about like the double jab as an exit. Go ahead.
Keeps Belal, I was just going to say, it keeps Belal honest and keeps him from entering the exchange. And the only way he really knows how to enter the exchange is on a straight line.
He did start to catch JDM with like the cross counter at some points, like later in the fight, off the double jab. Let's move on like to the next technique I want to discuss that was like used by both of these guys was lead leg switch kick. So like what did you think about both of these guys lead leg switch kicks in this fight?
Yeah, that was something that in the article, this didn't really come up as much. JDM does tend to have pretty good kick defense. Yeah, he has good like cross check, and you see it work a lot. Even if the cross check doesn't like block the kick completely, he's got his hands ready to catch it. He caught Bilal's kick on one instance this fight and was able to like uppercut him as he came in. But otherwise, Belal actually I think was doing pretty good work generally, just getting his kick in and getting the switch kick in. Because actually, if anything, if Belal has any quick strikes, that one is probably his quickest. I've ever seen him like move really quickly compared to other opponents. That's where he always looks the fastest, is with that lead leg switch kick. I think he definitely does it a lot, and he's got a good one. And it was probably his most consistently successful weapon this fight. And you saw JDM do it a couple times too. It was more, Belal's was generally, I think, more to the body. JDM's was more to the head and just getting Belal's guard up. But correct me if I'm wrong, because I know that part, when I was taking my notes, that was another one that was happening like kind of in the quote unquote dead space weapon. And that's something I've been talking about a lot recently, is like the dead spaces of a fight. But throughout his whole career, that's been his dead space weapon. And that was his most consistently successful one here.
When I was watching this, whenever Belal did like, he would throw it like underneath JDM's like a right hand sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a really good look for him because every time like JDM would like pivot out or exit or throw that non-committal right hand, like that left kick would just slot in right into the body. JDM would more shoot his switch kick towards the head. And I think the reason for that was, like we said earlier, Belal likes to parry and dip to the power side. And every time he does that, like he's leaving himself open for that head kick. Like Leon hit him clean with it.
Yeah.
And then he hit him clean with it in the rematch too. But good look for JDM to use to just stand Belal up.
Yeah.
Because like you said earlier, like I think it was more that switch kick to the body or that switch kick to the head for JDM wasn't to like knock Belal out. It was just to freeze him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just to freeze him, keep him honest, keep another weapon out there that he has to be aware of, and that would dissuade him from changing his level.
With JDM doing that, I think he did a good job building off of that switch kick. After he'd land, he'd throw like a same side punch into rear hand, which is great because whenever Belal takes that kick, he's often off balance. And
Yes.
like, what did you think about that?
No, I agree. And like I said, that was the one that I picked up on a little less upon my initial and my rewatch. I have a better read on it than I did in terms of how he was building off of it. Kicking game for JDM, and you probably want to get to this at some point. I know I've talked about Dead Space. Now it sounds like the whole fight is Dead Space based on what I'm talking about. But when really nothing was happening, and especially in the later rounds of the fight, he had it throughout the whole fight. But his Teep kick, and this is something that Jack Slack's talked about, you want to use against wrestlers, you want to use it all the time. And this is probably why Belal's body kick wasn't as effective at actually slowing JDM down or being a consistent weapon, was because JDM was the one whose attritive weapons, we've talked about, the body work with the jabs and the right hands, his attritive weapons, his whole game plan was really centered around the attritive weapons, and that was his most consistent form of offense. With the Teep kick and the inside low kick, he was landing it from in the open and the closed stance. He always was trying to get the inside, though.
Yeah, so this is perfect because that was like the next thing in my notes.
Perfect.
JDM's front kick. So like the way he would use it was when he was in southpaw and he constantly feinted. And when we say he constantly feints it, that's during the dead space of the fight. And by feinting it in that space, he's doing it in the space where Belal wants to shoot. And it looked to me like Belal, like whenever he did try to shoot, like he would hesitate, like just like a split second. And
Yeah.
with Belal, he's not that good at catching kicks and turning them into takedowns. Well, not many in MMA are, but like he's more of a shoot along the fence and then chain. So like, yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, exactly. And the Teep kick, one, like again, that's kicks against like you don't want to kick, quote unquote, like MMA golden rule, don't want to kick against wrestlers because they can catch your leg. But as with anything, there's nuance to this. Like you said, Belal isn't the best at actually converting those kicks. And two, the Teep kick, a quick Teep kick like JDM had here, it's kind of hard to counter when it's just coming in on that straight line because the opponent is generally in their stance, solid in their stance. They're not rotating at all. It is kind of just like the jab of kicks. And I think Dominic Cruz said this. A lot of people have said this before. It is like the jab of kicks where you just shoot it right out there and put it right back. And it can also work as a good way to change your stances, and you can enter the range like that. At the end of the day, he kept stabbing it in Belal's body. And there's a couple instances you can see, like you said, where one, you would see Belal hesitate to kind of shoot because he had this Teep kick throughout the fight that he had already established. And there's a couple key instances where you can see Belal looks like he wants to enter range, or just as he's about to commit to an entry, JDM just pops him with the Teep kick at the perfect time. Because when you're just doing it in the, like we've said, in the dead spaces, those are the times when you have been controlling the whole fight, and the other fighter, in this case being Belal, gets a little more desperate to actually want to get something going. That's the perfect kind of weapon. It's very non-committal. It's very easy to throw out. Just poke it right in their belly. And by the end of the fight, like Belal's got great cardio, but it had war between JDM's power and between the constant threat of the Teep kick. It wore on him in a cardio way, and it wore on him in like dulling his actual reactions to commit to any offense.
The way JDM was throwing it, or the way he's chambering it, like I thought that was making it hard for Belal to actually like read, right? Because like he would chamber it in a way where like his knee would chamber up. So
Yeah.
I thought an interesting look for him to use the front kick. And I also thought that like when he did feint it, like he would make it obvious. That was a really good idea from JDM. Is like make your front kick obvious, but like when you're about to throw it, like chamber it in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. And it did work pretty well with there was only a couple times he did this, but he did have the knee going throughout the fight. And, obviously that was most prescient in the Burns fight where he was actually able to knock him out with it. That was more off of like a scramble. But if you're fighting a wrestler, I talked about this in the article where you see JDM use the uppercut a lot against the wrestlers, and he feinted the uppercut pretty well here. It didn't actually come into play a lot, mostly because the work with the teep and his feints and his jab kept Belal from really shooting all that much. So the uppercut didn't really come into play. And it does tend to be a bit more reliable of a threat, of a counter to the takedown, simply because you're staying on your feet. It can convert into an underhook pretty well. And it's probably going to land on something, even if it's just their chest. The problem with the knee is you're on one leg and you're basically presenting them your leg. But when you have it with the teep kick like that, the knee itself can almost become a feint for the teep kick, like an additional feint for the teep kick, and you can just play them off of each other as like another double attack. They have the same startup motion, and you don't really know what he's going to do, and he's going to get hit with something, whether he's coming in for the knee or his entry is just stopped wholesale by the teep kick.
With the knee, like the knee specifically, Jack was more throwing that like off the fence, right? Like when Belal would try to use his transitional offense, like whenever they'd break the clinch, like he was the one that he would use like as a reaction to like Belal trying to strike off of him off the clinch. Whereas the teep here was more like you said, it's more of a good lead, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the knee's better as a like a counter or in those transitional moments, which that was the other best part of Bilal's performance was his transitional offense, especially along the cage. He hit JDM with a lot of clean strikes in those transitional moments after JDM had defended some takedowns. So that's another thing that Bilal's really good at. Historically, he's been really good at, and historically, not enough people in MMA do really well.
Mm-hmm. It's just that he doesn't have like to like hurt people when he does get those transitional moments along the fence, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't able to go to his takedowns enough to, at the very least, he was dissuaded from doing so, to at the very least get that going so he could get into like a clinch position and then get it off, like someone like Marab does, who just shoots a billion times and then punches or kicks off of it. And that's where most of the offense is happening. That's like a really good path to victory for Belal. And it would be a little bit more of an exciting way he could win if he used it a little more in that way. But generally, he's looking to stay on top because there's a lot less threats when you're just laying on top of someone, to his credit. Like, you can't blame someone for wanting to do that when you're not the most explosive guy in the world against guys like JDM and Leon, who have this legitimate knockout power.
It was hard for him to get that position to push JDM to the fence because of all the feints and non-committals that JDM was using.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's an important distinction that we have to make, is that like Belal versus JDM is completely different than Belal versus Leon, because Leon is willing to concede that space, whereas while JDM does feint and does use non-committals, he was trying to get Belal to reset a lot in this fight. And when Bilal's resetting, he's not attacking.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. But JDM's just not. Leon's just such an interesting case because he's so good. He's so technically clean. He's got this wonderful clinch game. But like, this is where fighting comes down to like those really intricate things where, one, you don't know what a fighter's thinking. You don't know what they want to do. We can glean that from watching film and what their habits are. But it's just, at the end of the day, decision making. And that's what I had said JDM really mostly needed to change, was his decision making. And when you're in a fight, when you're at this level, when you've had so many fights, it's really hard, and you probably don't want to completely change your style just to try and win a fight against someone because it's the best game plan against them, because you're going to end up doing things that you're uncomfortable with, that you're not used to. It's not going to come out as clean. You're going to be thinking about it too much. Really, you want to add in a couple things that work really well, like the down block, which did make a big appearance this fight. JDM kept getting his lead arm in front of him and Belal's chin. But just changing your decision making and not overextending to tailor your game plan around.
That's the key word here in this podcast, right? Decision making. Because we saw with JDM against Basil Hafez. His decision making in that fight was absolutely dreadful. Like
Yeah.
his takedown defense was just a jump a guillotine.
Yeah, and like, but even in moments of that Hafez fight, like he defended the takedown perfectly, and then he just jumped the guillotine after that. Like he was just like having, like it just seemed like he was kind of having fun and just wanted to finish this guy. He wanted to try and get a finish on this guy because he felt like he could because he was some no namer. And like like there's fights like that, and we'll talk about the fight all the time, but once you saw the Burns fight, you knew that wasn't how he was going. He wasn't doing like the Dustin Poirier thing, which is also kind of funny. It's kind of funny, because yeah, you're conceding bottom position. It was probably worse for Poirier because BSD is just like a really good athlete who also fought on this card. But yeah, like it is just decision making. His takedown defense is fine, and it definitely improved for this fight. But he just changed his. He just never did the same things he did against Hafez, and look how much better he did against against a better wrestler.
The way JDM like defends takedowns is he often gives up his hips, and I think the really good adjustment was the head block that he used.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, the head block was great,
and the position of the cage, because you can see when Belal is going for a takedown in this fight, it's like really telegraphed and it's way too far out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Miguel had posted one clip before the fight of JDM using like just that straight up high guard, get down low head block on it was either Burns or Hafez. And literally he didn't need to do you don't need to do anything. You just need to get down low and you keep the good head position. And that's like all you need to do against a far out telegraph takedown like that. And there was, that one really good instance of him getting the head block. And anytime else Belal got on his hips, he was able to get that lead arm down in between them both, where he was able to lift Belal's head up. He usually got like some sort of Russian tie or a 2-on-1 on one of Belal's hands. Because if there's one thing you don't want Belal to do, you don't want him to connect his hands when he has you along the cage, because you're at wit's end. All the people in the Dagestan teams do that, where once they get their hands connected, whether it's on a double or they'll just connect it right under your crotch for the high crotch, like Belal famously did to spike Leon Edwards' head into the ground. It doesn't matter how much better of an athlete you are. The leverage is just so not in your favor. And so you need to isolate one of those arms. You need to get your head in between them. You need to create space between their bodies and your hips. And JDM he was super prescient at keeping that, because like you said, I said, he didn't really give up his hips, but he's really good at scrambling and creating a scramble, getting his underhooks from there. But when you have a guy like Belal, you don't want to do that at all. And looking forward, when we're thinking of like an Islam match, you really don't want to do that. You always want to be at least fighting one grip, because Islam's even better along the cage. I think even with the weight discrepancy, he'll be even better in those positions along the cage. And that's where he's going to need to be really careful, aside from the positioning, but you're going to find yourself along the cage sometimes in a fight.
I think the cool part about JDM's head block is that it integrated perfectly with his weave. He'd weave a lot, like after he'd throw each punch, and that really gets in the way of Belal's level change. You can see this throughout the fight. Like his head isn't like going straight down like what Dustin Poirier did with Islam Makhachev, where like if you remember that fight, he'd throw a jab and like bend at the hips and like he'd be picking up a penny, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's good for Poirier, since like that was the most proactive takedown defense he's had. But yeah, exactly. This is a much cleaner way to do it that integrates with his game. And that's also why I think, like, when you talk about Belal tactically getting the good left hook and the good head kick to counter JDM's head movement, like, that's a good read, but it also him doing that doesn't complement his A game of trying to get in on the hips. Those are, they're two completely separate things that you're going to need to do. And though you can counter that with one thing, it's still denying you from your A game.
With a switch kick, you are getting tall. Whereas like what Belal wants to do is get the opponent to the cage. Two completely different things. Like compare that with JDM's weave and head block. Like they mesh together perfectly.
And that's the thing that JDM did so well this fight, and that goes into the decision making, not trying to change your whole style for an opponent. Like, you need to the game plan was so cohesive, in just the overall style he implemented was so cohesive, one, with his existing style, and two, everything just flowed together really well. that, like you said, the head block into the weaving and his jabs and dip, and then you had the dips, and like he was constantly changing his levels to stay to keep that level chain Belal. And also, in that perfectly complements wanting to pivot around, some lateral movement, switching stances with it. Like it all worked together really well to deny Belal from the position in the first place. And if he was able to get to that position, have an automatic counter there that would deny him from getting to that next step.
Yeah, and this is something I talked about in Fight Mind. You don't necessarily have to completely change your game to be the perfect foil for the opponent. You just need to make the right stylistic adjustments, which JDM did perfectly here.
Exactly. Because anytime that if you try and completely foil your opponent, you're just going to do things you're not used to unless you're naturally acclimated to that. And you're not going to be able to fight that way because we all have habits that we fall back on in life, even. And you want it to be as seamless as possible with what you already do so that you don't even have to think about it. And that it's easier to drill in throughout those 8 weeks to become more of a part of your, this isn't the right word, but like fighting lexicon.
Hmm.
Generally, like it's hard for people to do that as human beings. You have things you want to fall back on, and I mean, that's part of having a really good coach and team, is the coach not trying to do that, the coach knowing what you do well. And I mean, that's always been the thing with fighting in all combat sport. You hear this in little snippets of interviews, whether it's the coaches or the fighters, of countering your opponent or just going in there and enforcing your game. And generally, you see the best fighters kind of adopt this mixture of them both. I think Conor McGregor had a really great quote back in the day about, like, I don't care what the opponent's going to do. I'm just going to go in there and do what I do best. And that worked really well for his style most of the time. This is talking about like his prime run, of course. It's an interesting conversation, and it's definitely different for every fighter. And that's up to like the coaching team and the staff there to, bring that out of their fighter in the best way possible. And I think Scrappy MMA definitely did that best. And I mean, again, Craig Jones is kind of becoming infamous now against Dagestani trained fighters, because he just seems to have a really great mind for teaching people things in the grappling discipline that work really well with their game and counter what has, for the past, what are we in 2024, like 10 years, been the MMA grappling meta.
With Craig Jones, like against Islam, Volk did not even try the knee lever sweep. And I think that was a great idea. He did the head post into the fence where it would be hard to mat return him. Whereas in this one, JDM did use the knee lever sweep, and I think that's more because he has the physical attributes to off balance Belal from that bottom position, right?
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is kind of going to decision making. You see JDM use the octopus guard, use butterfly hooks. He's trying sweeps, or at the very least, even if it's not a successful sweep, he's really good already at staying moving and keeping space between him and his opponent's hips while on the ground. He's doing that all the time. So you can integrate something like that, and just Craig probably did so many things and just had so many rounds of just starting on top of him and trying things from there. And I mean, I think the other consideration there is probably the size thing, where, these guys are the same size. JDM is a little more well muscled, a little more physical, and Volk was coming in as a smaller guy, where those things kind of made sense. And I just think I love Craig Jones. I think he's a funny guy. I like his grappling style. I watch his stuff. He's really becoming, I think, a really standout MMA coach for grappling.
Another consideration we have to make is Volk, like stylistically, these two, like JDM and Volk, like on the ground, they're completely different. Like
Completely
Volk,
different.
yeah, Volk does his best work when he's working along the cage. Like even defensively, he's really good along the cage. And I think that's why he wouldn't necessarily go for knee levers
Yeah.
like JDM, who, like you said, like he goes for switches, he goes for Granbies, like
Yeah.
Octopus Guard, the Eduardo Tella Turtle. Like that's the kind of stuff that JDM likes to do, whereas Volk is more like he's more like a methodical fence wrestler, like from both sides.
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. Methodical fence wrestler, and like denying that, like getting to the ground wholesale. Like you just generally don't see him on bottom a lot, not really working from bottom. And he's only ever looking to just get right up without, without like more quote unquote like tricky things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that kind of benefited JDM here because JDM gives up his back a lot. And with Belal, if you do give your back up against Belal, it's not the be all end all.
Oh yeah, Bilal's not really a huge submission threat. I'm sure he's a great grappler. I'm sure if we grappled, he would submit me a lot of times. He might not choke me. I'm really good at choke defense, just saying. But Belal is not the best submission threat, and he's never really looking for them. He really is just trying to kind of stay on top, hit some pitter-patter shots. And even when he was on Leon's back, Leon's defense was great from there. He was just able to kind of do his thing. I'm sure we might talk about this a little later, but when you look at a potential matchup against Islam, like Islam as a submission, like Islam is one of the premier submission threats in the sport. So maybe things have to change for that, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, exactly. With Belal specifically in this fight, like he's more of a guy that wants to take top half guard and then just stay there.
Yeah, top half. That's what he loves. He loves sticking in top half guard, throwing a couple short little elbows and punches, and keeping you down as long as he can.
Yeah, and what he wants most is close guard because he can win the entire round from there.
Yeah, exactly. Because he'll just stick it there, and he doesn't even need to do that much damage. And that's the other problem with, let's say, the Aldo fight, not this one specifically, but like the Merab Batista fights. But even in his second fight with Leon, like a lot of people scored that for Leon because Belal is good at winning a fight on optics where he has a majority of the round where he is in the advantageous position, which, the scoring criteria is by damage, but you can at least understand why someone would then give a fight to Belal, like the Leon fight, even though he didn't really score that much damage. But that's also the problem. It's reliable in the fact that you're winning from an easy position, but it's not reliable from the fact that you're just not doing enough damage to actually offset what the other person has done throughout the round. If for 2 minutes or even a minute and a half, they beat the shit out of you, and then the rest of it, you're just laying on them, like, yeah, you'll probably get some judges to give you the round, but over and over again, if you meet a guy like JDM who has such good power, and even let's say his takedown defense wasn't as good that fight, this could have been just like the Leon fight where JDM picks him apart for like a minute in 2 or 3 of the rounds, and then Belal wins this like contested split decision. Like that was absolutely an option here if JDM's overall approach to denying the takedown hadn't worked on that.
And I think it also has to do with JDM's approach from bottom. Because like with Leon takes his time whenever he's getting up. Like he does eventually get up, but he's very precise when he's along the fence. He's gonna first try to get control of the fence side space before like actually moving before he starts wall walking. Where here JDM's like he's constantly changing positions. He's trying to get hip separation. Like he's doing a lot just to get up, whereas Leon will like slowly get up. And I think that's an important distinction we have to make.
Yeah, JDM's always looking to move. And I mean, the Leon thing, like that's precise you could encapsulate his whole fight style with that. He's always looking for the precise thing that works. And that leads to some really cool moments. Kind of in the vein of what I was talking about with Belal laying on top, it can sometimes be unreliable and easily taken advantage of.
And I think like if we compare the two, Belal like really thrives on the slow paced when he's on the ground, right? Whereas it really gave him trouble against JDM because like JDM's like you said earlier, he's constantly moving. And I don't think Belal actually likes that.
No. Yeah, no, he definitely doesn't. He likes to feel like he's just easily smother you on top and just kind of do his work from there. And you try some like bullshit submissions or something like a lot of people do on their back for some reason in MMA. Unless you're like Charles or Charles Oliveira, it's probably not going to lead you to anything. But even then, those submission attempts are for the purpose of getting back up.
Getting back up is that's another podcast all on its own. But
yeah,
I think we should move on to like what Belal did do well, because we can talk about JDM all day, but I think we need to give some credit to like what Belal did. One of the things Belal found out early is that he could use the double jab and counter some of JDM's positions. Like for example, he used a double jab into right hand, and JDM would like back up like as a response and then shoulder roll off of it. Jack Stack talks about this all the time, but the double jab works well against people with good movement or good defensive reactions because it forces the opponent to show their hand. And the times that Belal did double jab, it forced JDM to move and it forced him to defend. And you can see this throughout the fight. On Belal's first jab, JDM would either pull back or back up, and then he'd follow up with a shoulder roll. And when Belal would commit his right hand, he'd land it over that shoulder.
Yeah, no, there was a couple times where, yeah, Belal's double jab, and he would even usually start jabbing with JDM. Even if JDM landed cleaner, he was able to just kind of take advantage of a little linear retreat and follow up with the right hand that would hit him clean. There was like at least 3 or 4 really good ones he landed where it was just perfectly clean. And obviously, didn't affect JDM much, but it was really clean and a good read. And going off of that, like the double jab to get his head moving, you can do the right straight with that and land over the shoulder. And he didn't use it like proactively like this, but that's where like his kicks could come in again, is use the double jab to get their head moving and then just dome them in the head. And even if it doesn't knock them out, then you dissuade them from actually utilizing their head movement. And then the double jab itself starts landing, and it's easier to land like a combination off of that.
I think the biggest problem why Belal didn't have that much success with it is that he would reset most of the times after he did double jab.
Yeah, he wouldn't continue to push in. He would just kind of back away and reset. He wouldn't, like in the Leon fight, he would just continue pushing forward. And when they're retreating like that, or after you land a right hand, there's a couple times he did get cracked, and you'll probably get cracked hard by JDM. But that's where you want to just, especially if you're losing a fight, you kind of need to just wait in after landing something like that. That's your safer entry. And you can at the very least continue your combination or jump on the hips right there.
I think that's the biggest problem here. When he did double jab, JDM isn't doing a good job counter. I think that's one of the criticisms that I have here. When Belal did double jab, JDM would just focus on the defense. And like we said earlier, Belal didn't take up that space that JDM would give up.
I mean, the double jab's good just because it's so non-committal and so like not a threat that JDM's just like, oh, I'll just defend this easy. We can reset and we'll be back. And Belal let him reset by resetting himself after like hitting a good punch after it. When that's like your opportunity to, their senses are a little dulled right now. Senses in terms of their alertness is a little dulled because they're like, oh, it's just double jab. Maybe he'll hit me with the right hand after. Versus like, oh, now you can come in and actually take advantage of that and start to build a game around that.
And that's the important thing about the double jab. If you just have a double jab, like just essentially Sean Strickland.
Yeah. Or Alexa Grasso.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Like, because that is a prime example of like you see the double jab is working, but you keep resetting instead of taking space.
Dean Thomas was going crazy during that Grasso fight. That was actually one of the only fights I got to watch the night of. I was just wiped and I had some things I was doing, but that was one of them I watched the night of. And Dean Thomas was just going crazy. Like, she's double jabbing and not doing anything. And she would land it because Alexa Grasso's got a pretty good jab. It's like, that's not a form of offense that's going to score. It's just great. You landed your double jab. Now the opponent lands one good left hook on you, and now you lost the round. Like it's not meant to be a scoring weapon. Great if you score with it. You hit him with 2 jabs. Looks great. It's meant to be something that you can build off of and test the opponent's reactions from without much of a threat from the opponent other than like, a good cross counter or anything else that they might pick up on while you're doing that. But especially while you're advancing, double jabbing while advancing, you cut an angle after that, you hit something. That's your time to build off of it. And then you can utilize it as a weapon where then they expect one thing, then you do the other thing. That's where the beauty of those little non-committal weapons that are meant to set other things up come in.
To relate this back to Belal, he's talking about like how his game plan was bad, but I think this is something he could have improved on in this fight, right?
Yeah.
Using the double jab to get Jack to move, and then using the double jab to get him near the fence.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's part of like he's just not like I noticed this throughout the fights I watched, and I like the Leon fight's different in this way. I'm sure he's had a couple other performances. I just can't quite remember. I'm not trying to be cheeky there with his fighting style. Like just habitually, he doesn't really conform to being a pressure fighter who would most benefit from the double jab, even though that perfectly fits within his winning conditions. Do you know what I mean when I say that?
Use it. It was more like he just stayed in his face.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't conform to his style overall because of like the other mechanics that he has. He likes to lean back and he likes to back up as his primary form of defense. With the double jab, you need to be constantly changing positions, and he doesn't do that.
Yeah, he's not changing positions. He's really just coming in on those straight lines, which you can do with the double jab, but then that becomes an exploitable habit within itself. It's really just meant to be this setup tool, build everything else off of it, and that's where it would fit into his game to satisfy his wanting to get you down along the fence and pressure you to the cage where he can work his best wrestling. It's just he doesn't habitually do those things, so it doesn't naturally fit within everything else that he's doing.
Would be something that he could add would be like after he does double jab, he throws his right hands and then weaves.
Yeah,
because that plays into his level change.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you weave and then you're right on the hips and you've got something right there. No, that's a great read.
The way Belal like get on people's hips is he'll throw two nonsense punch upstairs and then he'll try to level change off of that. Like it's more of a set play.
Yeah, and I made that little video about Leon Edwards, really fighting that well against Belal, and it's because like Leon was giving it to him by Belal could just occupy him with a couple BS punches. Leon would throw up that hillbilly shell crossguard thing he had going, and it left his hips wide open. He was giving it right to Belal, and that like you were giving him exactly what he wants for minimal effort.
When Belal would walk up to JDM, he'd just get jabbed in the face.
Yes.
Whereas against Leon would back up to find the perfect distance to kick him.
Yeah, no, exactly. He would get jabbed in the face, and then when he would start those exchanges where he could get on the hips, then you're forcing this pocket exchange where JDM's just way better than you, and that's where he got cracked.
The way he was defending, it just compounded the problem for Belal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Because his defense was already so salient, because he was already getting that down block in, because he had that headbutt, because he already had everything built up to it from there. Belal was forced to kind of come in these just kind of wild exchanges near the end, and that's not going to help against JDM either, because you're going to get hit with these little uppercuts and hooks. And Belal, he likes his straight punches, but in those exchanges, he will just kind of swing wide, and they're not the mechanically prettiest hooks, which JDM hasn't had in the past either. They're mechanically good from a power perspective for JDM, whereas Belal, they're just kind of these big flappy arm punches.
There to find the entry or get the opponent's hands up. Talk about a couple of Belal's entries, because like if we looked at the first entry that he did, it's him throwing a 1-2, then going for a double leg where his posture and head position is really bad.
Yeah.
And then he's able to climb up on the body lock, but Jack's able to shut him off because Jack already has the bicep tie and the underhook.
Especially that early one where Jack was just able to shrug it off. Belal's chaining is good, where even if he doesn't have this really nice, takedown on the hips like GSP would, where you just get right on the hips and it's just beautiful, it can work from that as a good wrestler and as a good chain wrestler. But like you said, because of what JDM was doing, he just wasn't able to chain effectively because Jack immediately got the 2-on-1. He immediately had a good underhook. He would hoist him up. Even like in the third or fourth round, Belal actually did get right on his hips and his head was right in JDM's chest. And JDM just like hoisted him up with underhooks that he already had into like a body lock, like a body lock position. But that was a more even position and not one Belal could work from because he could just turn him around.
That entry that you were talking about, I think even with the combinations coming JDM's way, he was still able to down block, and he was able to get those underhooks in there. And I think that goes to show how little of a threat Belal's punches were, despite the Canelo hands.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, even when you look at someone like Colby's honestly not the worst analog for Belal, just in terms of like they want to do. Colby would just throw a bunch of stuff out there. He had a really good chin, so it could kind of work. He was almost like a little more Marab-like, where he would just continue throwing shit out there against like that Robbie Lawler performance, and then do his like patented little like head kick, head kick to stand him up into like the double leg. Like he had at least like a little process for that, and his mechanics weren't great either, but he could kind of overwhelm people with just his sheer volume. Belal, he's not really a volume striker in that way, even though he's got good cardio, even though he doesn't have these reliable entries besides just kind of occupying you with some BS punches in against someone with competent defense or someone who just doesn't really care, who's not super afraid of your takedowns because they're utilizing things like the down block. It's not going to have that same effect where even if you shoot a shitty shot and you can work off of it, someone with better defensive reactions like JDM was having isn't going to care, and they're not going to be so aware of your takedown threat that they're just going to put their hands up and be shell up defensively.
With Colby, the high kick into level change, I think that's one of his best entries because guys are so aware of that high kick that they have to defend it. And sometimes when he does throw that high kick, they throw a right hand back, so he's in on their hips right away. I think Belal has the ability to draw out big reactions like that. Like he's not able to draw out like counter right hand and then duck on the hips like Colby could.
Yeah, and that's the other thing with Colby is that the high kick, like Colby wasn't a super powerful striker either. The high kick, no matter how not explosive you are, it's a significant weapon that you have to address. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like that's honestly something that could maybe work for Belal if he kind of changed, some of the ways that he fought, simply because like you need to address the high kick, even if you're a weak puncher like Belal is. Like to set it up with these punches, but you're not a super powerful puncher. That high kick, you need to address it, you need to block it, you need to react off of it because it's gonna hurt whether you're blocking it or not.
I've written an article on this, the kicking the wrist, like the Charles Skarbowski kicking the wrist. Yeah, like even if it lands on your guard, you're gonna be off balance. If he could have landed the high kick on JDM's guard, that would have forced JDM to stand tall and he could get on his hips and then chain from there. He was wearing like the board shorts, so I don't think he had the flexibility to get his kick that high.
Yeah, and like we talked about earlier, he has like this switch kick. He does this body kick, but that switch kick, you're not in the position to go right back into your stance because you're shifting your weight, and then you need to come back down on your lead leg. The mechanics aren't as good for getting into that takedown because of how you need to reset versus how Colby would reset from his high kick, which was just like a normal high kick. It wasn't Lumpini ready high kick, but it doesn't need to be, especially if it's just going to be like a little kind of non-committal-ish one that you don't have a lot of hip turnover on, because he didn't have a lot of hip turnover. It would kind of be like the side of his leg hitting, but that allows him to bring it down quicker and then shoot the takedown. It's almost like the bad mechanics could almost like help you in that way.
The thing with Colby's high kick is it's coming from the southpaw stance, and he's usually against open stance fighters. So he has to take like one small step and pivot. He has to take one small step and pivot, and then the high kick's already there. Whereas Belal has to take that big telegraph switch.
Exactly.
And then level change. It would be a lot more difficult, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're just not in the position to do that easily.
Mm-hmm. What about Belal's like entry in the second round where, again, out in open space, he shoots another double leg, but Jack like perfectly gets his hips back and uses his head position to defend it. And I think what's important here is that where it happened in the cage, because again, he can't recycle his positions when he's out in the open, whereas against the fence, Belal can like chain to a body lock after he like fails a double. Yeah, I think what's cool about this one is it's part of JDM's defense. Like he just weaves into it.
Yeah. No, yeah, he just gets his head down and it's really easy from there. I mean, yeah, that was like, dude, like Belal, it was a valiant effort the whole fight, but he just doesn't have those reliable setup tools to get him to his A game, and that's the problem. Is that when you're not super physically gifted with power, you need to make up for it in other ways. And Bilal's kind of made up for it just like in the Leon fight, just pressuring. He doesn't really have those reliable pressure tools. Like his game it's not super cohesive, and his mechanics can kind of fail him, and he has these good reads and he's a good tactical and strategic fighter, but when one part of his game isn't going his way, like he's not getting any respect for his punches because the opponent isn't afraid of them, like then it all kind of starts to fall apart because he just doesn't have these it's just not super cohesive in that way.
Mm-hmm. Like he can't change the
way. I see it now. I got it.
Yeah, you saw it, right?
Yeah. He literally just had perfect head position and jammed his
Mhm.
forehead right into the temple.
And it was off of a weave too, right?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it was off of a weave. He was in the position already as Belal dropped down to just pick up that leg.
We know Belal wanted to get top position and stay on top position, but there's stuff that JDM did to make that hard for him. And like we say on Fight Mind, and what Jack Slack often says is you can't operate your A game. The best fighters in the world are going to have a hard time adapting.
Unless you're just a crazy talent who has a bunch of tricks up his sleeve that he's never needed to use before. I mean, I think the main one I've heard Slack talk about is like Frankie Edgar, how his striking and his post, you would just chain perfectly together, and the wrestling and the striking would play off of each other in that way. And if he's not getting the other one doesn't become as successful. When you at least deny one portion of their A game, everything else becomes so much harder for them, no matter who you are. And like you saw that in the Islam fight with Volk. Like Islam does have this wonderful counter striking game that he was able to lean back on. Generally won him large portions of that fight, but he was 100% quite uncomfortable. I think they both kind of did it to each other in that fight, where they both made their A games really uncomfortable in that fight. And then it kind of turned into this really interesting interplay where they were both doing their A game better than the other one.
At least at the highest level, they're going to struggle, right? Slack talks about this a lot. When you take away something that when you take a part of their well-rounded game, they can't go to the other one really easily. And well-rounded fighters, I think that's the biggest problem with them, right? You take away a part of their cohesive game and it just falls apart.
Yeah, exactly, because the game is how everything works together. And if you can break like a link in the chain, then the whole chain's broken, really.
Yeah, and I don't think I've ever seen a fighter that can my striking isn't working. Let's just go to wrestling.
Yeah, like you see that in fights where like there's an obvious some sort of skill differential there. You know what I mean? Or though the other fighter is so obviously not as proficient in that phase, even if the fighter they're fighting isn't as proficient in that phase, they just happen to be better than them in that one. You know, there's obviously all these edge cases. Yeah, I don't even know if I could think of one. I mean, like,
I think the closest would be, but it's not a well-rounded game, would be Max Holloway.
Versus Yair.
One example, because he had to start like taking him down. Like, Max Holloway overall, when something in his striking isn't working, he'll just do something else within the striking. So like he's got a more nuanced game with the striking, obviously, right?
Yeah, that's the most obvious one. That's what made me think of it. But no, you're right. In terms of like even a more nuanced way, like he can just keep trying different things and kind of seeing what will work as the fight goes on. And because especially early on when he just had so much volume, he's able to get a lot of different reactions, see what's happening. And the Yair one's the most obvious. And then you saw like, oh, he's actually like he can be a really effective offensive grappler. And Yair does happen to be gimmicky from the bottom, we'll say. Yair's just so dangerous, even if he's not super. I don't want to say he's not super crafty. He's just not like super educated, I guess, you know, in terms of like footwork and positioning and whatnot. And like how he's just always throwing kicks. But those kicks are really dangerous. And, you know, even if you're as good as Max Holloway and as durable as Max Holloway, like you have to contend with that. You know what I mean?
Yair has a big hole in that he's willing to play bottom.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's not necessarily that Max Holloway, like he chose the wrestling because like he's like an infinitely better wrestler than most people. It's just that in that specific fight, he had to go to the wrestling because he was looking really bad on the feet.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I feel like that's GSP's whole career is just seeing what they're really bad at and tailoring his approach to, you know, maxing in that area.
With GSP, which is different from Belal, is that GSP has like specific weapons that is hard for the opponent to deal with, whereas like Belal has flappy hands into takedowns, right?
It's just not, he doesn't have a potent weapon. And I mean, even the wrestling threat, he has competent takedowns, but they're not like these super crazy, you know, athletic double legs. It's just he has a win condition that can be oppressive when he's able to get to that top half or full guard position, because he'll just stay there and beat you up, especially if you're not trying to get up the whole time like JDM, but he's also good at denying that. It's just that he doesn't have the requisite potency to get there.
GSP had like a jab that he could establish early, whereas Belal doesn't really establish much early. Like if he's able to push forward, that's when his game like can get rolling.
Yeah, exactly. It'll just start working because the opponent's already afraid of getting laid on for 15 minutes.
And to wrap up the podcast, how you would game plan against JDM and what opponents you think would be like good matchups for him.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
There are the things that Belal did well this fight, in that with the double jab, you can get his head moving and you can start to build combinations off of that and start kicking off of that. That's definitely one of the big ones. Belal, I mean, his left hook was like a little tactical thing that I don't know how you could necessarily build a game plan around. Our boy Della say this. Sean Brady could probably have a good time against JDM just because he is a lot more insistent on the pressure, and that feels like more of a coin flip fight where he might just get knocked out because like JDM's just that, much better on the feet, but he could also just weather the storm and eventually get to JDM, and he's so much more potent submission wise that's a really good way to, like, you can definitely get JDM there. Even though he's so good in the scrambles, like Sean Brady is really, really oppressive, and he's a much more of a physical force than Belal.
Yeah, and we saw that against Kelvin, who like when Kelvin does get taken down, or Kelvin Gaslam, if you guys don't know. Yeah, when Kelvin does get taken down, like he'll just Peterson roll.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like it's like Sean Brady's like a way better top player than Belal is. And I think
way more just like Belal can lay there, but Brady like follows the scrambles, and he knows how to stay on top the entire time.
The left hook read, I think that's a good read from you. Is I think people should show the left hook, because one of the things JDM wants to do is to roll under that. If I were game planning against JDM, I would show the left hook and then have him roll and then like build off of that. Like show the left hook, right low kick, show the left hook, switch kick where he's weaving into. So like some of those ideas. Like what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And I go to those mostly because it's hard to game plan against a lot of his past fights just because he looked so improved this fight. So it's a lot easier to take things just from this fight that worked against him. Sean Brady's the easy one just because he's a lot more oppressive, but that fight I kind of see it as a coin flip, just because Sean Brady like isn't as considered on the feet, and if JDM can keep him up there for a little while doing what he did here and just stay in open space, he could just knock him out. He was knocked out by Belal of all people, of course. I wonder how Garry would do, simply because Garry is also shown to be definitely one of the better game planners in the sport today. And like the Brady's fight was really good in that way. And I think he knows how to, I think he does really know how to game plan, he himself, and also like, especially with a better kicking game, and him being, he's definitely taller than Jack, isn't he? He's got to be a lot taller than Jack.
Yeah,
I feel like he's a big lanky boy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do wonder how the kicking game would play into that and keeping Jack's guard up. And I could see him just like spamming a lot of kicks. And like I said, JDM's kick defense does tend to be good. And maybe if that's the only thing that, if it's a more consistent weapon like Garry would be bringing, and he's a little less worried about the takedown, even though Gary's been good with the takedowns recently, but I feel like it would be more like Belal, where I feel like JDM would have a little bit of an easier time than, say, with Sean Brady. And this is all off the top of my head. I would, of course, want to watch more film before making any blanket statement. I do wonder how, like, a kicking/wrestling game, kicking a lot from the outside and finding the moments to wrestle, would work against JDM. I feel like that's almost what people say about, like, Topuria, too, when you have these really good boxers, really considered boxers in all phases, whether it's, punch combinations, power, footwork, all those things, with really good head movement. They are somewhat analogous in that way, where you want a guy who likes to kick a lot from the outside, taller than them, who can also brings a wrestling threat, which is also why the Islam versus Topuria matchup is really interesting.
I think the Garry fight's interesting just because, like, Gary's not somebody that wants to hang around in the pocket, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's never trying to stay there, except in that like Song Kanan fight when he got cracked, if I'm thinking correctly.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think JDM could like put pressure on him, put him behind the block line where he can't use his pull counters. It's interesting in that, like you said, the kicking game, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he uses a lot of open side kicks. that could keep JDM's like right hand at home.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that could stop a lot of his slipping and weaving.
Yeah, exactly. And then how competent is he from there? And he's definitely good in like a firefight if he just needs to come in, you know. But yeah, if you can stop their slipping and weaving, if you keep their right hand home, if you can keep the damage up with kicks, and like I said, he's got a good cross check. You know, maybe he can just catch and counter off that. He has great catches and counters. But if you're looking at like a reliable way to just consistently occupy the dead space and keep them honest like that, you have the length advantage. I'm sure you could just keep putting kicks in and occupy him that way, and possibly catch him on a desperate. And
two guys that like they would need to create like opportunities to get clinches would be like Islam and Shavkat. I think that those are show the left hook, get him rolling, and then when he does roll, catch the double collar tie.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Shavkat and Islam, they do really good work from the double collar tie. And Shavkat specifically, he does a lot of really good stuff with the upper body clinch.
Yeah, exactly. And JDM, we've seen that he can work defensively within the clinch. He actually has a pretty good, I think it's Sotogari. He did show here that at the very least, if it doesn't work, it forces a reaction and he can kind of disengage and or strike off of that. Shavkat, those two guys are just like born and bred in the clinch. Maybe with Craig, I mean, the one advantage, and you can overplay this or downplay it as much as you want. Craig Jones has game planned for 2 fights against Islam, and he was doing it for a guy that was smaller than him. This time, Islam's coming up, and he's definitely an insanely strong physical guy. That's undeniable. But JDM is still a guy who's definitely larger than him. You know what I mean? And how does that come into play when you have a guy like Craig Jones who is aware of most of his habits, at least in the grappling phase of the fight? And even though it's not Volk who is the guy you're teaching, you're working on a more even physical playing field.
I think, like you said, that wizard kick that you were talking about, I think that is what's going to be interesting against these two fighters specifically, like Shavkat and Islam, because they know how to capitalize when the opponent does do that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, they can capitalize off that, and they'll either like get to the body lock and or try their own thing. I mean, they're just so good at off balancing, off basing the opponent in those positions.
And regaining their balance after they get off balance.
Yeah. No, exactly right. See, yeah, those fights would definitely be interesting, and it seems like the Islam one it has a good chance of happening next. Between the Craig Jones thing, between the clinch, between how well JDM did here. I mean, and that's the other thing. Islam isn't, a big open space shooter. He did it a couple times, against Poirier, but they're not like these super clean open space shots. He really does operate really well from the clinch, and I wonder how well JDM, who did have really good, movement this fight, he was staying in the positions he wanted to most of the time. I do wonder how he could prevent that and capitalize there. And Islam himself is a good counter striker, but also, JDM's a powerful, powerful guy. And when you're hit with something like that up a weight class, how is that going to change your counter striking game plan?
Yeah, and that's the thing with Islam. He's not really on the lead. So that's going to give JDM some opportunities to like establish his jab early, like even though it is Southpaw versus Orthodox. And that's going to be, I think that's an interesting aspect of that fight is that JDM is going to constantly make him back. I think JDM would be the one that forces Islam to back up behind the black line.
Yeah.
Unlike this,
Yeah, exactly. I could definitely see that happening just because Islam isn't generally on the lead. And we've seen it. Islam is a great talent, but we saw like in the Poirier fight, which he did win, but when Poirier was going forward, he did have to like contend with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it would be interesting if when the physicality is a little more matched, and Islam, it's not like Volk where he can just like head kick him with abandon. He doesn't have the length advantage in the same way he does at lightweight in general, and especially against Volkanovski.
Right.
Where you can, and because Jack can enforce his kicking game and just keep teeping in the belly, which would be a little harder against a guy like Garry or Shavkat. You can still definitely do it, but the risk of getting counter kicked from that range is a lot more prescient.
And that's the thing with that Islam matchup. Like, would Islam focus on catching those kicks, like those teeps to the body? Because we don't. Do we really see Islam catch kicks and then dump and then run through on a takedown? Actually, we do. So that might be something to like keep an eye on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think the fact that it would be him moving up in weight, like, definitely just makes it intriguing, especially with how good JDM looked here
Uh-huh.
against a less impressive grappler than Islam.
Right. And another matchup that like we kind of hinted on is Shavkat. And like I think a lot of people are gonna overlook JDM in that one because they think
Mhm.
Shavkat is unstoppable force. But when you look at what Shavkat does, like he walks people down in his head, like his main defense is just to like pull his head back. And
Yeah,
that's
I
like
mean, you saw him get
right.
cracked by Jeff Neal so many times in that fight.
Yeah, and that's right for Jack's double jab, right?
Yeah, his double jab and the fact that Jack actually throws 4, 5, 6 punch combinations on a retreating opponent.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. And like when Shavkat is moving forward, like he gets really square.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that the actual striking aspects, I see JDM, he's heavily favored in that way, but it's just easy to have the blindness up regarding like the mythos of
Shavkat,
Caucasus
yeah,
region, yeah, Shavkat and like Caucasus region. Kazakhstan's not exactly Caucasus region, but like Caucasus region fighters.
yeah, and like with Shavkat, I think the advantage Shavkat has is the clinch, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's same with Islam. I think he can definitely operate more efficiently there. And he's got a lot of fun tricks there. That's where they have this A game where they have a lot of good tricks. They have all these wonderful throws and trips and off basing techniques that, it's easy to defend takedowns from far away. And Jack does have this really good defensive clinch where he always has 2-on-1s and stuff. But once you get the legs in it, and they're constantly pulling on their legs with like broomstick sweeps and trying to get through these throws and trying to slide by you, like that adds this new element that I'm sure JDM could. I mean, especially after this fight, I'm sure he could prepare for. But when you got guys as strong as that, it's hard to contend with them in those spaces, and especially when you've got someone who judo and like judo-esque things, it's so feel based, and you have to just spend so much time there understanding the feeling of what someone is like when you can take advantage of them and understanding weight transfers in those positions. It's so much more feel based than wrestling, at least like when you're just shooting a takedown. Wrestling is a similar way when you get into chaining things, but like it's because it's like a precise like ippon, you know what I mean, like to find
Yeah,
that perfect moment. You need just a lot of like reps and a lot of time in those positions, which you can't really get in an 8-week training camp. That's like from just your a life of doing sambo, judo, those sorts of combat sports.
yeah, I completely agree. And the another like consideration with Shavkat is that Shavkat need like when he does get those off balances, he's not necessarily looking to take you down. He's looking to
Yeah,
strike off of it.
yeah, yeah. Really good transitional offense.
Yeah. So like we can move on to our shameless plugs. So like this is the wrap up portion of our show. Do you have anything to plug? And then I'll put it down in the link in the description.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see with my little name, we do have a website. I'm Kick. I'm one half of the Movement Martials. One of my best friends, Thick. I'm the fight analyst. He's the strength and conditioning side. He's a certified coach, and should I plug all our stuff if you
Yeah,
don't
plug
mind?
all your stuff, man.
Great. Okay. So you can find all of our stuff at movementmartials.com. It'll take you to like our Substack page, but you just need to type in movementmartials.com, and you'll mostly find a lot of my analysis there. Um, all of my articles going forward are paid. It's $6 a month, but I have a huge library, like over probably 60 free articles, and the occasional free article here and there. But if you do want most of my analysis going forward, there's going to be at least 2 really good big breakdowns a month, and maybe even a prospective article before a fight happens, and one on something. They generally align with UFC pay-per-views, and one on something that I'm just kind of interested in. I wrote one on sumo headbutts recently. But along with my articles, we do have a podcast. It's pretty infrequent, but we just have fun there. We also have video breakdowns that you can find on our YouTube. We have fixed program. It's called Atlas 1.0. It's free. So if you don't really know where you want to start with strength and conditioning, but you want to get stronger and you want a well-structured program that explains everything for you, you can find that at the page that says Get Thick on movementmartials.com, or on the page that says Free Strength Program on movementmartials.com. Get Thick has all of Thick's articles. And you'll see a page that says Muay Thai Shorts. I'm working on something right now that you can click that. You can sign up with your email and get notified when those eventually drop.
Awesome.
I think that's everything. Oh, and follow us on Twitter, on YouTube, and Instagram.
All right, yeah, and I'll put all those links in the description box below. And yeah, and for the guys that are still listening, highly recommend movementmartials.com because I'm one of the paying subscribers and always loved his analyst ever since I stumbled upon it after UFC 292. So guys, really recommend you guys signing up to his Substack. And with that,
thank you, guys.
Thank you, and hope to see you around again, Kick.
Absolutely, you too, Ghost. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and I appreciate it.
All right, later, guys.